Hello and welcome to Horror Rewind. This is Kelly Florence.
And I'm Meg Hofdahl.
And this week we're talking about the X-Files. So you've probably heard the story a million times, but X-Files is what brought Meg and I together, like this show. And that's how I met Luke, her husband, and I introduced them, even though you met in the mall years before.
Yes, but without you, we would have never met again.
So yes, the X-Files is very important to us. And we're going to just talk about a few episodes of the show today and the show in general.
I feel like it was about this time of year, 2001. We're looking at each other with really wide eyes because we're so old. 2000. It was 2000, not even 2001. 2000, at about this time of year when we met. And it was because you were wearing an X-Files shirt.
Yes, and so it was like the time to be alive when you couldn't necessarily connect with people, via social media or anything yet. It didn't exist. And so it was old school, like, I like your shirt. Oh, do you like the X-Files? And then we exchanged phone numbers. It was that kind of thing.
It's so old-fashioned. Yeah, I mean, the internet existed, and I mean, you could randomly talk to people about X-Files on there, but it's not like it is now.
Yeah, exactly. And we did exchange emails. We emailed too, but it was back in the day when people called their landlines. So we're going to talk about a few of our picks, and there's no particular rhyme or reason to this or order, but I'll start with my first pick of an episode that stood out to me, and it's The Host from season 2. It was actually the second episode of season 2, so they gave us some good horror. It aired originally September 23rd, 1994, and the host is this creature, the Fluke Man, and I was surprised to look back and realize Chris Carter actually wrote this episode.
And FYI, you guys can watch all these on Hulu, I believe, has every single episode of The X-Files. Yeah, this is a good horror episode, and we were just complaining last night. We had some season 2 episodes on in the hotel, and we were like, season 2 kind of stinks because there's some pretty rotten episodes, but this is a really good one.
And it was like the days before, like they got into their groove, but it wasn't, looking back on it, it's not like every episode is amazing. So, but The Host, I feel like, is a really solid episode, and it builds on and builds up my fear of using like outhouses and outdoor porta potties and stuff. Because like, what if there was a Fluke Man in there?
Have you ever had like a bad incident using an outhouse? I feel like there's something you want to share.
I just think they're disgusting because it's like people's poop down there.
It is. It is disgusting. You're right. I mean, I try to avoid using them at all costs.
I mean, okay, when they used to exist as the only means of there was no indoor plumbing. There was the outdoor outhouse. My parents had a cabin. They still have a cabin that it was an outhouse. There was no running water. And there was an outhouse like on my great-grandparents' old property, that's what existed. Can you imagine? I mean, it's not like today where there's chemicals down there, safe chemicals, hopefully, that are, making it smell better and everything. But it was just a pile of poop, like in the ground. And there was probably bugs and the smell. And like, what sort of creatures would crawl in there or crawl out of there? And what if you fell in?
There's a great Stephen King short story. Have you read that? About the guy who is using an outhouse. I think it's at a construction site or something. And his like mortal enemy locks him in there and knocks the outhouse over. And he's literally underneath in the poop and trying to figure out how to get out. He's stuck in there, and it's definitely stuck in my mind because it's like, is there anything worse? Is there anything worse than falling into an outhouse? And yeah, I mean, when you think about, how long humans have existed, and thank God you and I live now where there are toilets everywhere.
Yes, like I have been camping where you just have to go in the woods. Like you have to dig a hole. And I think I'm past that point in my life.
Yeah, I mean, no, I've never, I thank God I've never had to dig a hole for that purpose. call me spoiled.
Okay, we were watching Naked and Afraid. Like, there was a Naked and Afraid episode on last night, and I was telling Meg about this episode I saw where the guy, like, drank some swamp water without boiling it, and he just immediately started throwing up and having diarrhea. And he was naked out in the woods, like, or the jungle or whatever.
And I said being naked out in the jungle with strangers having diarrhea, like, there's nothing worse. Is there anything worse than that? I mean,
Falling in an outhouse.
that's true. Okay, that is worse.
But, like, why? And then we looked up the prize for Naked and Afraid. You get a free flight to and from your destination, but you stay there for 40 days, apparently, and you get $5,000. I mean, what?
I would need a lot more than $5,000. I would need like a night with every man from Infinity War.
Oh, my God. Give me, yes. Okay, I'll do this. You have decided what the payment is, and that I shall take that.
Yeah, I feel like that's fair. If I have to be naked 40 days with strangers in the jungle, but give me a week to like fix myself up before my night with the Infinity War men.
Oh, my goodness. Well, this is, yes, we have discovered, because I'm like, $5 million? Like, how much would it take? No, and yeah, it's done. The payment is there. So the host, he's the fluke man. It's like the fluke mouth. Have you ever been to an aquarium? We have an aquarium in Duluth where the flukes are just like, or the lamprey or whatever they are, they're like sucking the side of the thing and you see all their little teeth. They're so disgusting.
Yeah, the creature in this episode is one of their most popular, and just the way it's designed is so icky, and it's just, I mean, even it was way back in 1994, but it's still very much a good creature design. And yeah, that mouth, it is like those when they suck the side of the glass, and ugh.
I remember one time, I think you were over, we were watching this episode with some mutual friends. It was late at night, and then all of a sudden there was some tapping on the window, and it was like a huge moth, which is also disgusting, but it's like, fluke man.
Yeah, we used to get ourselves really scared. Yeah, well, and you were mentioning the outhouse, because he literally crawls up through an outhouse. And I remember I was being interviewed one time, and I was talking about my fear of birds with the interviewer, and he told a story about how a bird came up out through the toilet while somebody was sitting on it.
An actual toilet or an outhouse?
I don't know, but that's, can you imagine Kelly's face right now? But anything coming, like, and there are like people who talk about like snakes coming up out of the toilet and stuff. So I don't know. It's just like you're so vulnerable. It's like being in the shower and Psycho playing on that. Anything having to do, like, if you're staying on the toilet, like, is there anything more vulnerable?
Oh, God. I'm going to be sick. We're talking about this episode, and I'm going to be sick. Okay, let's move on to one of your picks. Let's go in sort of chronological order here and talk about Home. This is from season 4. It was episode 2. Check out this list of people who wrote it. Glenn Morgan and James Wong wrote it, and Kim Manners directed it. Like, can you get better than that?
So those are some X-Files heavyweights. I chose Home because it's not necessarily the funniest episode, certainly not, or the most lighthearted, but there's so many elements about Home that I love. And it's funny to think about how it was, after its original airing, it was considered too controversial to air again for, I mean, probably 15 years or so. I mean, a very long time. And it's so funny to me when you think of shows like American Horror Story and things like that that are on cable now, or even on Fox, that are much worse, so to speak, than that, Home. But I guess it was a more innocent time then.
Yeah, I remember it being a big deal. And there was like an airing of Home in prime time, but later, and they had to push like a screen up warning viewers and everything ahead beforehand. And if you haven't seen the episode ever or for a long time, rewatch it. It holds up. It's about like this incestuous, deformed, disgusting family.
Yes, the Peacock family. And the actress who plays the mom was actually in a new episode of The X-Files in season 11, so that was kind of cool. But, I feel like Home is a good, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like if someone had never seen an episode of The X-Files, I feel like it's a good sort of gateway episode. I as you guys know, I skew more on the side of I love horror. I like sci-fi too, but I'm definitely a horror girl. And this episode, with this incestuous, disgusting family, it's first of all, there's not a supernatural element, which I kind of like, and it is horror at its best. But I'm getting distracted because my husband said, "Don't kill me." Oh, okay. I'm looking at my phone, and anytime you see your husband texting you, "Don't kill me," it's very distracting. Okay, yeah, it's just a great classic horror episode, and also what I love about this episode is it's about Scully sort of dealing with this idea of if she's ever going to be a mother, and like taking those two things together and putting them together is brilliant.
It is brilliant, and there's a lot of nice dialogue and moments between Mulder and Scully. Like they're sitting on a bench, they're crammed into a small bathroom together doing this autopsy. Like, oh, the other thing that's based on science, but it's creepy AF. They have been so incestuous for so long. There's the obvious deformities, the visual, but also they have like no sense of touch. Like their nerve endings are different, so they can get beat up very badly and not feel anything. So like it's like your worst nightmare. Like you're trying to fight off your assailant, and everything you do, they don't even know that they're bleeding or cut or badly injured. They can't feel the punch. Like that's scary.
That is scary, and they're like, and of course they look like something out of Hills Have Eyes, and it's all very blech. So something kind of cool that it always sort of comes into my mind about this episode is we went and saw the big yellow building that is sort of the headquarters of the police, and where they do the sort of not really autopsy, but kind of the little infant that they find. And that building I see in so many movies and shows. It's one of the main buildings in Riverdale, and I believe I saw it in a in a Snow Buddies or something like that. So I see that building all the time.
Yeah, if movies being filmed in the Vancouver area when that building pops up. And it was in the episode of Home. So, yes, good memories. So, if we're going chronologically here for our next favorite episode picks, the next pick is also yours, Meg. It's Modern Prometheus. This was about a year after Home aired. It was season 5, episode 5. This one is written and directed by Chris Carter.
So we give Chris Carter a hard time a lot because we feel like he's dropped the ball on the sort of later end of the X-Files, and sometimes his dialogue can be a little stilted and things like that. But I think this is such a great example of what he can do really well, which is this is sort of a referential episode where it's very much steeped in days of yore, I guess, so to speak. It's actually shot in black and white, and the aesthetic is beautiful. The music's beautiful. Not to mention, I absolutely love the Cher references. I am unabashedly a Cher fan, and I love, and I don't know if you know the story, I'm sure you've heard it, but that they asked Cher to be in this episode and she said no. And then when she saw the episode, it was one of her biggest regrets because she saw how sort of tenderly they treated her character from Mask, and how the creature in this episode loved her, and she wished she had been a part of it.
It's so good. It's, of course, bringing up those Mask references and this callback to Frankenstein and Mary Shelley and just sort of classic horror in general. Is it John Lafayette? Is that his name? No, John Hurley. John O'Hurley. He's in it, and it's just like the perfect part for him. It's so well done. And not Krychek. Spender plays the creature in this, who actually ends up being Smoky Man's son. So little, double casting there. But what a beautiful episode. And the Cher cover of Walking in Memphis. Like, I get goosebumps thinking about that song.
I know. I played it at my wedding because it was important X-Files moment, and it's great. Mulder and Scully dance at the end. It's so sweet. And yeah, there's this feel in this episode. It's sort of satirical. It's almost kind of making fun. Some of the best episodes are when they kind of make fun of Mulder a little bit, and he can kind of poke fun at himself. And there's, in the beginning of the episode, there's a bit of that. And there's this idea of Frankenstein, and, you know, if you create something, is it your sort of responsibility to take care of it? And there's all these sort of like undercurrents of all those things, but it's also just a fun episode with, again, a great visual, great monster who's not really a monster, you know. And I don't know, this episode is really X-Files at its best, in my opinion.
I agree. My last pick for an episode that I really like comes later this season, in season 5. It's episode 12, and it's Bad Blood. It was written by Vince Gilligan, who, of course, went on to Breaking Bad fame. And this one is definitely a comedy. It's a he said, she said episode. So we're getting to see the same story through the two perspectives, through Mulder's eyes and then through Scully's eyes. And it is hilarious. It's some of the best comic acting and writing of the series, I think. It's great for hardcore fans because there's a lot of references, but so funny. Lucas Wilson is a guest star, and it's about these vampires. Are they really vampires? Are they people who just want to be vampires? It's amazing.
Yeah, it's funny because when I think about it, I kind of always forget it's actually a sort of vampire episode. And it's fun because it's sort of like plays on like what are the sort of myths of vampires and what are vampires in media. And so it kind of plays on all those. I love this episode. Yeah, Luke Wilson's amazing in it. And the he said, she said, so fun because by season 5, like, we know Mulder and Scully. And so it's fun, again, to sort of see them sort of making fun of themselves a little bit. There's so many great quotes in this. So many. I mean, it's such a quotable episode. And, oh my gosh, there's just so much. Like, my mind's racing. I love when Mulder gets drugged and he's on the floor. I love just the feel it has. It's so funny. And, you know, I feel like this episode and Modern Prometheus are not good episodes if you've never seen the X-Files before, because they are more for people who appreciate X-Files for what it is, and then this just takes it to a whole new level. So I wouldn't say watch this episode first, but oh my gosh, it's so fun. And oh my gosh, like Scully in this episode, she's just so snarky and wonderful. And I think Mulder deserves a little bit of snark his way.
When she's being snarky and you would know his puppy dog look like, he's like, okay, like he can't get a word in edgewise. And she's just like, ah, like makes that noise more than once. It's so funny. It reminds me, like this proves like how appreciative I am of my parents. My dad made a pizza one time and then brought it over dressed up as, and he had a hat on it, said Bad Blood Pizza Guy, and he had like vampire teeth in. Like, that's really funny. That was nice.
Your dad's really sweet. I remember him doing stuff like that. He's funny.
So, you know, I appreciate that he got those references. We have to talk about one of our favorite bad episodes, because for some reason this episode gets us giggling every time we watch it, and it's called Ghost in the Machine. It's from season 1, and it's episode 7. So, like, this was early in the run. I'm not even going to credit the writers or anything because it doesn't matter. Wow.
It's just one of those episodes. It's bad. I mean, we're just going to be honest. It's a bad episode, but it's bad in such a delightful way. I mean, there's some bad episodes that are just boring, but this one is so cheesy. I mean, at one point you actually see cameras too in a reflection. So I mean, it's like they just kind of threw this one together, and we still reference it, and it will just bring you back to the 90s, that's for sure.
There's a point when they're looking at something on a computer screen and Scully takes a marker and circles something on the computer screen. Do you remember that?
Yeah, she literally takes a Sharpie to a monitor. So, I mean, it's just wacky. It's like there's a character named Jerry that's really random, and yeah, it's nuts.
I'm losing the company or something like that.
Yeah, it's really, the writing is just very questionable. Things don't make sense. There's a point at which Scully falls in an elevator. It's just wackiness. And yeah, if you're just, I would suggest watch this with your friends, with a few drinks in, or maybe something like that, because it's fun.
Or it could be a drinking game where you take a drink every time something cheesy happens, but you will be dead by the end of the episode. There's a point when, I don't know why, but some garage door like starts to open and then crashes on them or something, and Mulder's like, trick or treat.
Oh, Mulder.
So I don't know if that has anything to do with anything, but it's freaking hilarious. And then there's this one point at the end, I think it's a cop or another FBI agent or something. They use a reverse shot of him, so then the blink is like in reverse, and you know how a blink looks in reverse. It's not right.
Yeah, reverse shots. I mean, filmmakers out there, please don't do that.
Yikes. So if you want a good bad episode to watch, I would absolutely recommend Ghost in the Machine. Now, the season, what was it, season 11, season 12? 11. See, I don't even know, because I was saying yesterday, we feel like we're in this parallel timeline or parallel universe, and how can this possibly be real? Because there's all these really amazing things happening, like the X-Files came back, and then yet the world seems to be burning around us. So what are your thoughts on more X-Files or not?
Every time the X-Files ends, okay, so when the X-Files ended with season 9, I felt like my life was over. I was so dramatic, but I felt like, okay, X-Files is over. Like, I will never, ever see any X-Files again. And then that really terrible movie came out, and I'm like, and nobody went to see it, really. And I was like, okay, now it's really dead, because, it didn't do well. It literally came out like the weekend of Dark Knight. It just completely got, spanked by Dark Knight, and it wasn't good, which was really disappointing. So then when that happened, I was like, okay, well, that's the end. And then when the season came out a couple of years ago, I felt like, okay, this is all we're going to have. Like, I'm always at the end. I'm always feeling like this is all I'm going to get. So this season 11, I absolutely loved. It had highs and lows, but it was so much better than season 10. And I was so delighted by it. And Chris Carter made up for some stuff. I really wanted the Williams story to culminate, and I felt a feeling of conclusion with that story, that I was surprised that I didn't think I was going to feel that. So that was a nice treat. And I don't know, how did you feel?
I too felt better about this season than last season. The one thing I didn't like, and I still have a hard time wrapping my brain around it, and this is a spoiler alert, is that William was not Mulder's child that they thought they had conceived naturally, but the cigarette smoking man apparently drugged and implanted his seed in Scully, or, I don't know, used in vitro on her or something while she was passed out. And that's just a little icky. I mean, I guess it fits in the world of X-Files, but the cigarette smoking man was actually William's father. I don't know.
See, I don't think, my interpretation of it is that he's not his literal father. My interpretation is that that William is half Scully, half alien. So when he said father, and I also heard Chris Carter say this too, when he said, like, I fathered him, it was more of a Frankenstein way, not like it was his actual. Yikes. So, yeah, I know. I feel like about that too. But I felt like they concluded that story in a way that, not necessarily concluded it because it seemed like William died, but of course he didn't. And I would love to, if there's more X-Files, I'd love to see William again, because I want him to be a character, because I think I was really happy with how they didn't make him this sort of perfect person. I really liked how they made him a complicated guy who, like, didn't know how to handle all of this stuff. And I thought that was really nice, because they could have just made him, like, perfect. And I loved like the scene of Scully talking to him when she thinks he's dead. And there's just so much great stuff for Gillian Anderson to do. And Mulder and Scully have a natural baby now, and they, in the episode, we got to see them actually have sex, and they made a baby. So I feel really good about it.
I think it's more than we could have asked for, and definitely, as you were listing off all the times that we thought it was over and never being able to come back, more than we could have ever hoped for. So you were talking about I Want to Believe, and I just remember when we went to see it on opening night, it's back when you had to see it at midnight because they didn't do 7 p.m. showings. Your husband kept going into Step Brothers, which also had a midnight showing, and he's like, Step Brothers has more people in it than the X-Files, and we're like, stop it!
Oh, I didn't remember that at all.
Step Brothers was the number 1 movie that weekend.
That sounds like something he would do.
It gave me so much anxiety. I get a pit in my stomach thinking about how Step Brothers beat out the X-Files that weekend.
Yeah, that was rough. And I remember after we watched it, all just sort of walking back at night, not talking to each other because we didn't all want to admit that that was kind of a bad movie.
It felt like someone called our children ugly or something. And not that that even matters, because like now if that happened, I'd be like, okay, screw you. But this felt like someone had taken our baby that we loved and ruined it. I don't know.
And it wasn't that it was so offensive or anything. It was just like, it was basically like a mediocre standalone episode. Like it was like this, why is this a movie? And we thought like the sort of mythology and like we thought it was going to be on a bigger scale. And we thought I guess we can appreciate that Mulder and Scully were together. So I like that about it. So it wasn't a complete dumpster fire, but
It was pretty bad though. Something that I read the other day is that the first time the phrase binge watching was used was in reference to the X-Files. They literally wrote an article about it. And of course the X-Files fandom is credited with the term shipping. Shippers were people who wanted Mulder and Scully to be together. No romos were people who didn't want any romance. And then fencers were people who were on the fence about it. And I thought I was in the minority being a shipper back in the day before the advent of social media, but then I realized no, actually we all shipped them.
Yeah, and I mean they were definitely my biggest, they still are my biggest ship of all time. I've gone on to ship many more. But yeah, and we are talking about YouTube videos and social media being out there, but I have to admit there's some fanfic with my name on it out there in the universe. There's some X-Files fanfic out there if you guys are are savvy enough to find it with my name on it.
I think the X-Files prepared us and taught us how to ship and not get much out of or proof, or not necessarily proof, but visual confirmation. We lived on glances, on tone, on touches, on hand grasps, and I love that stuff more than sometimes the explicit stuff.
Well, yeah, and it sort of set us up for now that when we ship other people in shows, it's all we need is a little handhold, and then if we get more, we're like, oh my god.
Yes, exactly. And I talked about this on the podcast before, but going back and rewatching Cheers with Sam and Diane, their whole thing, it's very nuanced, and I appreciate that. And New Girl, talking about Sam and Diane, now it's Jess and Nick, that their whole thing, it has been chemistry. It's palpable. You can just feel it, and I feel like that you can feel that with Mulder and Scully.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's just certain combinations of people that work, and I have no idea what David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson think of each other, out of the spotlight, but in the show, they just, whatever it is, it's just that unspoken thing that it works. And it's not even necessarily all romantic. It's also just, they just work on many different levels where they're just a delight to watch interacting with each other, whatever the situation. And that's what made the show successful. I mean, because there's a million shows out there that have horror and sci-fi in them, but, this show, it's because of them is why it was successful.
Speaking of chemistry, two things have come to my attention lately because of binge watching, and then just I saw an interview. The two guys in Perfect Strangers. I don't know if I've told you we binge watched Perfect Strangers, but they had such good chemistry, and it was like the comedy aspect and timing. It couldn't have been anybody else in those parts. And then I saw the interview the other night with Jeff Daniels and Jim Carrey, and they were saying their chemistry immediately when they met each other was so on that they just knew what to do when the other was in the room or on in the take. And yeah, it's not necessarily romantic. It's just, you just know.
Yeah, and I mean, we've all watched things where we're like, there's no chemistry between these people. So, I don't know, it's just, X-Files is so great, and if you guys haven't watched it, I don't know, I feel like I want to tell people to start at the beginning, but I'm also like, maybe you should, like, dive into an episode like Home or something, and then start at the beginning.
Yeah, you might have to do some standalones that you don't need a lot of backstory for to just sort of appreciate what is there. But let us know what your favorite X-Files episode is. And until next time, we'll see you in the horror section.
The truth is out there.